long run. And we're going to contain those two characters that you see on the screen. I mean, they will not win the century if we can act with our partners and allies. So, you know, I think there are a lot of important things happening, but more needs to happen.
What do you want to see in terms of acting? Because, Jonathan, we hear a lot of talk, right? And we're hearing more talk. So here we are hearing them talk about it. I agree, it's nice to see them talk about it. But what do you actually want to see in terms of action from these, from these leaders? I mean, Giorgia Meloni has actually taken a stand. She said, we are not going to continue this Belt and Road strategy that China has implemented in Italy, thanks to my predecessor. She put a line out there. She drew her red line. So I get you. You're right. Italy, I see what they're doing in Italy and Giorgia Meloni. But what else is being done?
Sure, that's great, but there's still 140 countries involved in the Belt and Road. And, you know, I think what needs to happen is we have to go after the Chinese corporations. The best way to do that, the smartest way to do that, is to think big on this and execute on some of the big ones. I mean, right now, I think where things are too weak is the conversation around sanctioning Chinese banks is about the smaller banks. And as some people point out, you know, some of these little banks are the ones that China's going to use to get around Western sanctions into Russia. So if they move their transactions into smaller banks that can be sanctioned, you know, that allows them a sort of the ability to let a bank fall and not be affected. But some of the biggest banks in China, I mean, the big four Chinese state-owned commercial banks, two of them are incredibly active in Russia. So Agricultural Bank of China, which is the #4 bank in China, and then China Construction Bank, which is the #2 bank in China. I think those are the two targets. That's what I would be most interested in. Those ones, as very good researchers have pointed out, are digging in Russia. I mean, that's been true from the beginning. You know, so I think we go after some of the big four state-owned banks that are essentially tied to Putin's military enterprise. And then the whole rest of the State-Owned Assets and Supervision Commission. I mean, you have 97 corporations, $5 trillion in revenue, 30 trillion in assets. All of that is the bulk of the Chinese state. It does their global business worldwide. It's China incorporated, and that's the strike zone. I think that's where we have to be targeting. So no, we're not thinking big. We're not acting big on that stuff, but there's a huge, beautiful target set that I think we should be very busy on and get our allies in. I mean, if it takes these sorts of meetings to get people to understand the problem, the next move has to be action.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, you know, by the way, the major banks who want to operate in China should be reminded that the largest banks in the world are Chinese. So the competition is serious, and they are looking to take out American banks and continue financing the world by communist China.
Эти условия очень простые. Украинские войска должны быть полностью выведены из Донецкой, Луганской народных республик, Херсонской и Запорожской областей. Причем, обращаю внимание, именно со всей территории этих регионов в пределах их административных границ, которые существовали на момент их вхождения в Украину. Как только в Киеве заявят о том, что готовы к такому решению и начнут реальный вывод войск из этих регионов, а также официально уведомят об отказе от планов вступления в НАТО, с нашей стороны незамедлительно, буквально в ту же минуту, последует приказ прекратить огонь и начать переговоры. Конечно же, хотели бы рассчитывать, что такое решение и о выводе войск, и о внеблоковом статусе, и о начале диалога с Россией, от которого зависит будущее существование Украины, в Киеве будут принимать самостоятельно, исходя из сложившихся реалий и руководствуясь подлинными национальными интересами украинского народа, а не по западной указке. Хотя на этот счет существуют, конечно, большие сомнения. Сегодня мы делаем еще одно конкретное, реальное мирное предложение. Если в Киеве и в западных столицах от него, как и прежде, также откажутся, то в конце концов это их дело, их политическая и моральная ответственность за продолжение кровопролития.
Hey, everybody, it's Alex with Reporterfy Media. I have CYRUS, JANSSEN, Daniel Dumbrill, and, of course, Patrick Lancaster on today's program. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And this is actually a special event for all of us here on the panel here today. We are delighted that you are taking part of this live stream. It's quite important for us because we have known each other quite a few years, but we've actually never met in person, a few of us, that is. I'm going to pass it to Daniel Dumbrill, who is allowing us to host this wonderful program in a studio. Daniel, thank you very much for having us here tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's finally my first time to meet Cyrus in person.
Yeah.
We've been connected to for a long time. And Patrick, finally in China. I know you've been talking to people in China for a long time, but now you're here face to face. So no, it's good. And I think we've got a lot of topics that we're going to cover. Originally we started out saying China focus, but there's just so much to talk about. And I think you want to mention some of those things now.
Absolutely. As we've just saw the clips at the start of the show here, they covered, of course, all things China with Maria Bartiromo bantering on. She just loves saying that word communist.
Yeah,
she just loves it.
It's a hot topic word.
Yeah. And as well, we saw that there was a peace offer by Vladimir Putin that made some headlines here over the weekend. Let's start it off with being in China here. I mean, Patrick, you've just arrived in China mainland here for your first time ever. Thoughts of coming across the border? I'm sure there was a lot of people that told you, look out before you cross the border here, and you're here now. Thoughts?
Yeah, Alex, and definitely, as you guys said, it's great to finally meet Cyrus and Danielle in person, and nice to be here in China. Had some thoughts about how it was going to go before I arrived, and some were accurate, some were wrong. But I originally first came to China via Hong Kong, spent some time in Hong Kong, and then crossed the border into mainland China there. And it was pretty interesting how streamlined it was, just crossing the border almost without human interaction. I took a train, and my passport basically acted as my ticket, and several scannings of the passport, and just one person-to-person interaction before getting on the train. It's very streamlined and definitely fast. One of the high-speed trains, and then arrived here in Chongqing, and it's been a interesting couple of days.
Well, fantastic. And we're going to head over to the rest of the panel here. We have to my right here, Cyrus JANSSEN. Cyrus, welcome to China.
Well, it's always good to be back. I know many people know I used to live in China for 10 years. Got a real, just great heart for China. It's always fun to be back. And this is actually a special trip because I've actually coming back for 6 weeks with my whole family. So brought my wife, my 3 children. We're back here for an extended stay this summer. We're primarily based in Guangzhou, where my wife is originally from. So we're visiting some family and doing some travel around as well. So excited to be back. And I think it's just important to get an accurate glimpse of what's really happening in China. You hear so many things. You'll hear one tweet with one picture, and it's like, oh, China's economy is, crushed and everything's falling apart. It's great to be back on the ground to actually, let's go take a look. Let's go see what's really happening. Let's connect with locals. Let's connect with expats. Let's see what these stories are really happening. And, certainly going to create some nice YouTube videos. This is obviously a treat, first to meet Daniel. We've been friends for probably 5 years now. Never had a chance to actually meet in person. So to share the screen and to be here in the studio is fantastic. And also to meet Patrick. Patrick, you've been on my channel as well. Obviously, Alex, we've collaborated a lot. We saw each other in Shanghai last June, about a year ago. So it's just nice to, reconvene here in Chongqing. What a great city.
Daniel, having us 4 here on the panel here, you've had a discussion with all these gentlemen before, as well as interviewing Patrick from a distance. Both of you did, Cyrus and yourself did. Right. He's sitting with us in person here, and that is important. Patrick, we got you on here. We're going to switch over to Russia for a moment here and really kind of dig deep into that. Then we're going to move on to some China stuff, and we got some other stuff in store a little bit later. Tell us, your thoughts of this conflict. 2024, I didn't think we'd be here still talking about this. You've been there 10 years. Maybe share with the audience, what a day in the life is like with Patrick Lancaster.
Yeah, Alex. Well, it goes day by day, but unfortunately, every day people are dying, and that's a horrible thing, regardless on what side they are, what side they favor. Just yesterday, there's a reported over around 9 civilians killed in Belgrade in cross-border shelling from the Kharkov region to the Belgrade region of Russia. And this is Russia, not a disputed area of what Ukraine and the West considers Ukraine, or what Russia considers legally part of Russia by Russian law. This is actually a region of Russia. And this is something that happens every day there, shelling coming across the border and hitting civilian areas in the Belgrade region and other regions of main Russia. And unfortunately, it's not just there. It's also in the Donetsk and Lugansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson regions that people are dying every day. I mean, it's hard to, impossible for me to keep count of how many people that I've seen killed over the last couple of years. And hopefully this conflict comes to an end soon, but it's not looking good. I mean, we saw yesterday the president of Russia put some starting peace terms out, and it was quickly laughed off by the West and by Ukraine. But I mean, the fact is, regardless of what you think about the situation, Russian law considers the 4 regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, as legally part of Russia. So there's really no way that Russia can bring this war to an end without fully controlling those regions. And the West seems to be pretty set on not letting Ukraine give up those regions, let alone Crimea, which for the last 10 years, the West and Ukraine has been saying is going to go back to Ukraine. The fact is, the people of Crimea and these regions don't want to return to Ukraine. I was there for the referendum in Crimea 10 years ago, and I went there to see what was happening with my own eyes. I came from Europe after seeing the Western mainstream media saying people were going to be forced to vote a certain way, to break away from Ukraine and join Russia. And the fact is, Crimea used to be Russia before 1956. If people were born in Russia before 1950, or in Crimea, before 1956, they were born in Russia. And the people were happy to join Russia, or to rejoin Russia. This is a fact. The vast majority of Crimea was ecstatic to be able to return to Russia. And this is what the people of Donetsk and Lugansk regions wanted as well. And they stood up and tried to make new borders, build a new government, made a referendum in 2014 to break away from Ukraine. I was there. I covered that referendum as well. And time kept the people pushing and making their own governments, and Ukraine attacked because of this. And this war started 10 years ago, not 2 years ago. It was a civil war. And the people, the local people of these regions, fought to break away from Ukraine because they wanted to join Russia. And they had a referendum to join Russia in 2022. And I covered that as well. So I've tried to show the world what was really happening on the ground, but not everyone wants to listen. But I'm going to keep trying.
Well, we commend you for that. CYRUS, we started really focusing much later on the Ukraine in 2022, probably a few months after that. And once again, Patrick, we commend you for that decade of work that you've done. Did you, Patrick, I'll go over to CYRUS. I mean, when we interviewed Patrick here, and you as well, Daniel, in 2022, we thought this thing would be over 2 or 3 months, huh?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anybody could see this prolonging for so long. And I think what's really interesting as well is I've been also watching Russia and how they've been able to really bounce back and really been able to navigate this situation that they were in. I had a friend of mine that is actually European. He actually went to Moscow for a visit. He was doing some business there, And he basically said, he was talking to the locals. He said, look, we've, all the McDonald's left, but we replaced them with Russian ones. All of these companies left. For example, if you wanted to still buy Apple products, it used to be an Apple store. Well, now it's just an official retail. It's a reseller, so they've basically pivoted and been able to, get around this. And I think we're starting to really see a shift in the media from what I've seen, is that a lot of people are now admitting the fact that, Ukraine does not have the manpower to really deal with this. So, for example, if we're going to give them another $50 billion to fight this war, the issue is really it's not really a money issue. It's not a weapons issue. It's really a manpower issue. And the simple thing is well, how long are you going to support this war for? And how long can we really endure this? I mean, this has absolutely crippled Europe. It's been a disaster for Europe. I mean, there's so many Ukrainian refugees that are there that, there needs to be a negotiated settlement. And the problem is that we're seeing, Europe and the United States are very divided upon this now. We saw a new poll came out just last week that some 88% of Americans and 94% of Europeans want NATO member states to push Ukraine to a negotiated settlement. So that is an absolutely unbelievable poll when you think of that nearly 90% of the people, 9 out of 10 people in both North America and Western Europe are wanting their, NATO members to push for a negotiated settlement. But you can see the complete opposite is what is happening in our democratically elected leaders, who are supposed to have our best interests at heart, but they're not listening to people. There's a huge disconnect from what the people actually want and what actually the politicians are doing. We saw this peace summit, but Russia's not there. So you have all these countries in Europe saying, okay, we're going to go for peace, but the one person you need to negotiate with to get peace is not even there. So it's a tough one.
I'm going to add to that. I asked Patrick this question yesterday, and it was it's a very basic question. What is the end goal of the West in Ukraine? Seriously, do they actually think that they're going to push back Russia right back to, let's call it, the pre-2014 borderlines there? We've had a referendum in that part of the Ukraine and Russia. They've decided they wanted to be independent. They've voted on it. They've fought for it for 8 or 9 years. They continue to fight for it. The money keeps coming in. Soldiers keep dying day to day. What is the end goal of Ukraine and the West here? If it's not territory, what is it? Seriously, what is it at the end of the day? And I'm struggling with this question all the time. You pump in $500 billion into this war to push back Russia. Where? What? You want to, Zelensky, you want to get territory back? Do you think you're going to get territory back? And we've also seen the Russian economy has moved on. Even though, let's say that Putin's terms were accepted, it's over. As far as I know, Russia has completely de-dollarized. Its economy has moved on. It's pushed all the Western countries out. It's been sanctioned 16,500 times. It's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow morning and everyone's going to kiss and make up and say, hey, welcome back. Open up the doors. Everybody that you've banned from visas over the last 2 years, come back in, travel. Oh, yeah, if you're on your way to your villa that we sanctioned and this property that we seized. I think we're in a whole new world here, and want to hear your gentlemen's thoughts on that. We'll start with you, Daniel, if we can.
But I mean, in terms of the question, what is the end goal? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. But the one thing for sure is there's a lot of people making a lot of money from this. And it reminds me of a quote from Julian Assange when he was talking about the lengthy war in, I believe it was in Afghanistan at that point. He said the goal wasn't to win the war. It was basically to prolong it and take taxpayers' money from the U.S. and wash it through these multinational weapons manufacturers back into basically Lockheed Martin or whoever it is, who then, of course, fund the very politicians who are pushing to keep this war going as well. I mean, there's a massive conflict of interest with this kind of stuff. Is that the primary reason? Is that the primary thing that they're after? I don't know, but it's definitely one of the perks for many of the people who have their hands in this.
I mean, there's another thing that I want to bring up here. If it's not weapon manufacturers, if it's not, NATO, if it's not other entities that are making money on this, I mean, at the end of the day, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people dying. This relationship with Russia, major territory in the world here, largest country geographically, China stepped in there. China has put its geopolitical differences aside and said, okay, all right, we understand you guys have conflict, but we're not going to let your economy sink. And some in the West seem to think that that's China supporting Russia military as well. Anyone want to add to that?
Well, I think with in regards to China and Russia, I mean, they've been, close friends and allies. I mean, there's no, for example, there's no problem if a Chinese company wants to do business in Russia, right? I mean, it's just, so I don't think that this has really changed anything. It's not like, oh, all of a sudden they are, these guys are allies. Well, it's not like that just happened, 2 years ago. They've been allies and friends and partners for a long time. But I think what, China, I think they're very strategic because, they obviously still have relations with Ukraine. They still have relations with Russia. And, China, as far as what I'm looking at, is they're going around the world and wanting to establish relations with as many countries and regions and areas as possible. And that's what we have with the Belt and Road Initiative, with 150 countries around the world signing up for this. That's very much China's, they're all about trade. That's really what China's about, right? They want to see how much trade we can do. And there's certainly no doubt that it's certainly increased, with Russia since the war has started. But, I think it's very interesting when you hear these Republican, whatever that guy's position was, he said, we need to go after the Chinese banks. Let's target China Agriculture Bank. Let's target China Construction Bank. We're going to go in there. I'll answer that question, though, that you said, what is the end goal? I think the end goal absolutely is to push Russia back to those pre-2014 lines and ultimately weaken Russia to the point where they can get regime change. That's always the United States' mission. I mean, let's just call a spade,
okay.
Right?
Okay, yeah, I get it.
I mean, that's. I mean, in a fantasy world, that would be best case scenario, right? Let's drive Russia out. Let's get rid of Putin, and let's install somebody that we like in there, and that and that's basically what it is. So I'm going to tee that up for Patrick. There, he's looks like he's ready to respond.
All right, yeah, Cyrus. It is a fantasy world for anyone to think that the Ukraine is going to be able to drive Russia back to the pre-2014 border, and the United States knows that, and literally every country knows that, and Zelensky knows that he knows they're never going to get Crimea back. They're never going to get all of Donbass back. Maybe there'll be some gains here and there, but let's just look at the last few months since Russia took Avdiivka, which is a suburb of Donetsk, that they've been shelling the center and the areas of Donetsk for Ukraine shelling these areas of Donetsk for the last 10 years, and especially in the last 2 years, since Russia was able to take that city, which many thought was going to happen 2 years ago right away, including myself. But since that happened, Russia has almost switched to just an advanced moving motion, and even the Minister of Defense of Russia weeks ago said that since Avdiivka was taken, they had taken over 800 square meters of new territory, and this is happening every day. Russia is continuing to take more and more territory. There's no going backwards. Yeah, a lot of people were surprised once Russia moved back from the Kiev, Kharkov, and Kherson regions, but in the last months, they're pushing forward. So obviously everything is strategical moves. And, as I said, most important thing is to bring this to an end as soon as possible so people can stop dying. But the fact is, with these, magical wishes and fantasy world initiatives, it's just not going to happen in the way of Russia leaving these territories. But the most important thing is because the people don't want it. The people that live in these territories are Russian, speak Russian, and want Russia to be there. The majority of the men that live in these territories are fighting for this and have been for years. The people of these regions do not want to be part of Ukraine. They want to be part of Russia. These people deserve the right of self-determination. And for the West to say and to push Ukraine to take this territory back to the old Russian border is just ridiculous. The people of these regions hate the West for this because they want to say where they live and how they raise their family and how their family and children don't be killed by the Ukrainian shelling coming into their neighborhoods that is supplied by the West. Western-made weapons killing people, civilians, every day. And so, yeah, as you said, it's a fantasy world.
Go ahead. Okay, so I'd like to add to that a couple of things. I mean, it must be an interesting time for an American to be where you are right now, since there is a lot of the weapons from your country landing on the heads of people there. I have an interesting question. I think we talk about, Russia advancing, taking these territories. Are we talking about, villages that are in the Ukraine that they're taking territory, or is it in the declared independent area where they're, protecting the territories, like in the Luhansk, Donbass area, the Donetsk area? You say that Russia continues to move forward, right? Mm-hmm. Is that territory that Ukraine is losing, or is that territory that the Russians are pushing back, that the people have called for independence? Or
both.
We'll call it part of Russia now. Sorry, yeah.
Both. A lot of the games are taking place in the Donetsk, Lugansk, the Donbass, and Zaporozhye and Kherson. But also there's games by Russia being had in the Kharkov region of Ukraine, the region that Russia does not consider legally part of Russia now, but as well as a largely almost all Russian speaking area. And who knows what's going to happen there. And this, again, and I go back to my first comment about the war, is that the Kharkov region is the region that Ukraine is using to launch attacks on the Belgorod region and other regions of Russia, right? Not the disputed areas. So, yes, both.
Okay, so before I wind up on this part, let's say Russia continues to get territory. What happens in these small towns, villages? Let's say we hear in the news, the West says, we're going 1 kilometer territory that has been, retrieved from the Russians, or maybe 2 or 3 kilometers. I mean, these people are on probably Ukraine gas, Ukraine cellular phone networks, Ukraine municipality, and all of a sudden Russia has taken that town over. How does even the local person who in one morning wakes up Ukraine, the next morning wakes up, Russia has come in and taken that territory? Do they allow, an integration period where these people, because they're towns that were part of Ukraine at one point that have been captured by the Russians, do they shut off the power grid? Does Ukraine just sabotage the area? We don't get this information because our journalists are not on the side that you're covering. So what happens let's give me an example. Small village has been captured by the Russians, and let's say everybody was on the Ukraine water, Ukraine electricity, Ukraine mobile. What happens? What's going on?
Well, one thing that also changes besides the electric and all that is the time changes, because the areas that are claimed by Russia are on Moscow time, not Ukrainian time. And the money changes from hryvnia to rubles. And as far as Ukraine's reaction to it, I've done many interviews. The first I did was in Volnovakha, just after Ukraine left. I was the first Western journalist in the city after it was controlled by Russia. And public on my channel right now, the locals telling me that as soon as Ukraine left the area, even before Russia had come in, Ukraine opened fire on the city as they were leaving. And also many reports of Ukraine executing their injured soldiers. And I was in a hospital in Volnovakha where I saw Ukrainian soldiers dead. And the locals said that they were killed by their compatriots as they evacuated and gave up the city to Russia. And as well as in Mariupol, on my channel many interviews of locals saying Ukraine fired on civilian areas of Mariupol. I just show what I see with my own eyes and what the people have to tell me. But as far as cell phone signals, electric, gas, and things like this, of course, it's a huge logistical problem when an area changes hands. First thing to go when the fighting starts is the cell phone reception, then the electric and gas, and a lot of these small villages, they just get their water from the wells. And then the buildup, the rebuilding process starts after Russia takes control. But as far as Ukraine actually shutting things off, we can go for a big example of Donetsk, how for 8 years, Donetsk more or less wasn't affected by Ukraine shutting any utilities off. They moved their electric, moved to being supplied by Russia and things like that. Kind of a gradual, but nothing really just shut off immediately, like Crimea, for example. When Russia took Crimea, Ukraine shut off the water almost right away. But after Russia took Mariupol, it became clear that Ukraine had been letting water go to Donetsk because the water apparently went through Donetsk to Mariupol. And since Mariupol was still controlled by Ukraine, they let Donetsk keep the water. But once Russia controlled Mariupol, Ukraine shut the water off to Donetsk. And it went from having water every day to having 2 hours of water every 3 days. And even now, there's at most in the city 2 hours to 3 hours a day, sometimes every other day. And this is how life has been for the last 2 years. That's a little bit here and there of an answer for that question.
Thank you, Patrick. Pretty remarkable stuff when you think about it. And there must be just a huge amount of land that cannot be lived in now for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years that had just been scorched earth. We're going to flip over to Cyrus now. I have a question for Cyrus. We talked about one of your latest videos you had about the petrodollar.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that for a moment and explain to everybody what that was all about with the Saudis that had an agreement with America? You have a big video that's doing really, really well.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of reports that have come out saying that Saudi Arabia has ended this 50-year deal with the America, as far as exclusively selling the crude oil exclusively in dollars. There's been a lot of different medias that have come out on this and said this, so it's still a little bit early in here. I think some people are waiting on some other media outlets to report this, but I think what we're seeing right now, Alex, is one of the things that you've said earlier in the stream that really hit head is that the world is really shifted now, right? Like for example, we're not just going to go back and this war is going to end and then everybody's going to go back to Russia and everything's good. The line has been drawn in the sand. It is a multipolar world that we're living in right now. And another word that you really picked up on was de-dollarization.
Yeah.
And so I think what's very interesting, and I think why this video has been very well received and why it's gone viral on Twitter, is that once you remove yourself from this Western media bubble, specifically the American media, and how, they just want to control the narrative on everything. When you go outside and you look at the global South and you're really looking at the developing countries in South America, in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East and Southeast Asia, all of these countries, they want to break free from the United States dollar. There's a global movement moving away from, the US dollar. I've been covering that a lot in my recent videos in the last couple of months. We're constantly seeing trade deals, between China and other countries, and there was an interesting interview as well with Congressman Thomas Macy, where he interviewed with Tucker Carlson, and he talked very specifically about the fact of the US dollar, that, we're shifting away. And, now I think just recently, I think Putin and the Kremlin announced that they're now 100% off of all dollar and euro. Like they're done with that.
Did you see that news on, I believe it was Thursday or Friday, that they halted trading of the ruble US dollar exchange on the Moscow exchange? Did you hear about that?
Yeah,
news?
yeah, I think that's what I'm talking about. Like it's like, so $0, €0 now.
Well, it was Russia was preparing to, drain its funds of dollars, but That shows you that was the last stab that America had. 16,500 sanctions, European Union behind that, joining forces with them, and now they're going after the currency. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. You would think news like that would just crush the ruble. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. I mean, I think, again, what I really try to look at is I look for tipping points, and I'm looking for events, and kind of I always want to see what's really going on around the world. But again, de-dollarization, moving away, and even with BRICS, BRICS is, there's new, Turkey has come out and said, look, we're very interested in joining BRICS. We're going to be very actively looking at that. I've seen a lot of reports coming out that's up to 40, 50 different countries are now looking into BRICS. There's a lot of buzz going on with the BRICS alliance. And again, it's BRICS is going to be launching their this thing called BRICS Pay, which is going to be their independent payment system. It's not specifically it's not going to be a currency. It's not going to be a new currency. There's been some speculation that it would be. It's going to be more just trading in our local currency. So I think you're going to start seeing that what this war has really happened with the U.S. dollar is that it's told the vast majority of the world that it's not a safe haven anymore, right? And that was the lure of the U.S. dollar for so long, right? The United States is a stable country. It's safe. It's a consistent dollar. Hence why we're always going to be doing trade in dollar because it's consistent. But now countries are saying there's too much political risk. I don't want that risk. Let's go ahead. You know what? If I'm in Vietnam and you're in China, we can figure out with our local currencies and how to make this deal work.
Did you think that maybe you can help out with this one? Cryptocurrency saved the Russian economy?
I'm not sure how much crypto they're using, but I wanted to build on what you were saying. I mean, that was a huge shock to everybody when the U.S. went in and froze Russian banks' foreign assets,
right.
Foreign reserves. And even people who were happy to see that, even people who were allies with America, would look at that and say, wait, hold on a second. This is something that can happen. That doesn't seem very safe. Right. And before that, I mean, it was with Afghanistan as well. They froze their foreign assets as well. And then arbitrarily started deciding that, I think we're going to take half of it and distribute it to the victims of 9/11.
Right.
That was something they put on the table. Taking away money from the people in Afghanistan who had nothing to do with 9/11 to begin with. When Trump walked away from the JCPOA deal with Iran, the European countries who signed the deal and wanted to continue following that deal were also bullied into not trading with Iran, even though they were still following the agreement. And it led to them actually looking for an alternative settlement system. I believe it was called Intex or Instex or something like that. They were trying to set up so that they could still trade with Iran according to the deals that they signed.
Right.
So this kind of thing has been a long time coming, and I think it's potentially the last nail in the coffin is when they did this to Russia and showed everybody that it's just the risk is too high.
Yeah.
The risk is too high.
Yeah.
But we've got our other camera set up. I just want to mention one other thing too, is for everybody who's on my stream who was tuning in from the beginning. If you didn't see the live chat option, you can refresh it. You can close it and reopen it, and it will show up now. I didn't have it turned on initially.
And for all my Reporterfy media people, head over to Daniel Dumbrill's channel. Leave a comment in his live chat as well. Let's get that chatter going here. I actually think I'm going to be clear with you guys about the working the cameras at the same time. I'm loving this. Okay, let's do it. Let's go camera 3. There we go. So I have to say we underestimate crypto because I have done a few transactions here with some Russians and they know how to get around this. When you corner people, when you block people's funds, when you block businesses, when you block the average everyday traveler, I'll ask you, Patrick, you arrived here in Hong Kong. Could you use Russian rubles at the currency exchange place?
Yeah, it was quite a shock, actually. Me and my wife coming directly from Moscow. We arrived thinking like a normal airport, we could exchange money, but you can't exchange rubles in Hong Kong. That's a fact. And there was one kind of little bit off the wall place that we found, the only one out of about 15 places we went to that was about half price.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
Oh, wow.
but
Price
yeah.
gouging.
And as far as the crypto and Russians go, yeah, I mean, it's one really amazing thing about cryptocurrency is it's a borderless currency. So the Russians, they use it to get around the whole block by the West and the Visa card companies, and they use it to almost flawlessly bring funds from the West to Russia, and that goes for the normal person to, I assume, higher level transactions.
What would you say, though, Patrick, is, the average thing that Russian people are worried about now? I guess they've had some inflation issues there, understandably. But, they can't really travel to Europe anymore. That's one of them. Businesses, do you think Russians would trust European banks or businesses in the next near future?
I guess not too advisable. But I think the thing that the Russians want is the war to be over as well. I mean, this it's not great for anybody, involved. And it's a shame after 10 years of fighting that it's still at this level. I mean, if the facts are, Ukraine had an option to let the people that voted to break away from Ukraine leave Ukraine, and hundreds of thousands of less people would have died, and these people would have had the right to self-determination, as I said. So, I mean, it's really obviously complicated, but it is what it is. I mean,
well, let's go back over to these two gentlemen. I've been watching a couple of videos on you guys' channels here over the last few weeks. Daniel, you've had an interesting guy on one of your last podcasts when you were speaking about Gaza.
Oh, the doctor. Yeah, Dr. O'Day.
Can you share with the audience? I think this is quite an extraordinary interview. Maybe just tell us about it, maybe some of the panel, because guys, whether you think it or not, whether you think all of us have all the time in the world to watch each other's videos, we don't. Yeah. But sometimes we play catch up here on some of the podcast. But just tell us about that interview.
Yeah, I mean, it was just as worse as you would expect. It's worse even. The fact that all of these doctors who are there working away every single day are doing it for free also. They haven't been paid. Basically, the Ministry of Health has completely collapsed. They can barely get any supplies in. Obviously, they're doing, operations on children without any sort of basic medication, anesthesia. Kids are, walking around with their names written on their bodies just in case they get blown up and they have to identify pieces of them. It's an absolute nightmare. I'm still in touch with him. He sends me messages every couple of days. He's had to move his family again because there are no real kind of safe zones there. But it's just it's an absolute tragedy. And to tie it back into China, though, it's really remarkable to see that all of the same people who were pretending to care about Muslims in China, and seeing them want you to believe that what is now happening to Palestinians in front of our eyes was happening to Muslims in China without any actual evidence. They're now on the side of the perpetrator. They're now on the side of the people who are actually delivering that suffering. And it was just, I mean, it's really interesting to see. I think this has been a really eye-opening event for a lot of people. People can kind of see exactly what's going on. To tie it into Russia also, when Russia was... I think they were accused of cutting off water and electricity to some places. I don't know whether it was true or not, but that was what the accusation was. And in the European Union, they said that that is a war crime. That is an absolute war crime, and Putin needs to be held accountable for that. But after Israel started cutting off water and electricity to Gaza, these same European Union politicians said, we stand with Israel. So I think across the board, there's just so much that has happened over the last few years that has woken people up to what these people are really about and how things actually work.
I mean, Cyrus, we've been covering this as well. Having a few people on our program talking about Gaza. I mean, it's a hot potato. and we have to tread lightly with.
Well, I want to add my another comment on there for the Gaza is that, quite simply, this is the tipping point again. I think this is the one tipping point that there's just such blatant hypocrisy, because again, like Daniel had brought up, for the last 5-6 years, we've been hearing this consistent narrative, that China is prosecuting Muslims in the Xinjiang region. Then it's not prosecuting, it's a genocide. They're genociding these people. And so it's like, now we have such graphic, images. And that's the issue. Like, you look at Twitter, there's no censor on there. Sometimes I'll wake up to some extremely graphic, images of just blowing up children on Twitter. And this is the live shots from Gaza. And I think that's really what has happened with, why TikTok has been so big. There's one Palestinian journalist that I can't pronounce his name. I forgot it, but he within about 3 months, went from zero to, I think that it went from 0 to about 18 million followers on there, and everyone is like, oh, again, you have this kind of the propaganda saying, oh, well, TikTok's owned by China, and they're promoting more Palestine, and it's like, no, it's you have to actually look at the demographics, because the demographics of TikTok users are much lower, and they actually care about this because for the first time in their life, they are seeing what's actually being held, what's actually happening on the ground. And people are not standing for that. They're not standing for this absolute blatant hypocrisy. Exactly. I remember that. I remember when they said, Vladimir Putin's got to be held accountable for cutting off water. Israel does the same thing. It's like, well, you know what? You gotta stand through it. And so this is, and it's the same thing. We've seen, like, show me anything in Xinjiang that looks anything remotely like Gaza. It's not even close. It's just shocking.
You can go to places in Israel where Palestinians used to live, and they're gone.
Yeah,
they've been kicked out of their houses. Anybody can go to Xinjiang, and you can go there. And who's living on the lands? Who's growing crops on their own land? It's the Uyghurs. They're still there. They haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like night and day. And that's exactly why U.S. lawmakers recently have started proposing a bill to ban Americans from being allowed to travel to Xinjiang.
Right.
It's not the government that's supposedly causing the genocide that doesn't want you to come and see what they're doing. It is America that doesn't want you to go and see, because once you go there, you're going to realize that it is absolutely disconnected from the reality that they're trying to paint.
Absolutely. And let's just be honest. If China's committing a genocide, they've got to be the worst at doing it, because the population of Xinjiang, of the Uyghurs, is increasing. So it's the only genocide in history where the population increases during the genocide.
And the only genocide that has a bullet train network going through it now.
And actually the most airports of any province in China.
Unbelievable. But I think the key too, though, is that like when you compare it to Palestine and Israel, people have been removed from the lands. They have been taken off of. They're not there anymore. Right. Or if you go into the West Bank, it's run like an apartheid.
Yes.
And now recently, I don't know if you saw the news, the Israeli government has confiscated the taxpayers' funds from the West Bank to distribute it to, I can't remember what it is, to the war effort or something like that. So now doctors and people who are living in the West Bank, Palestinians, they're not getting paid anymore also.
Yeah.
And they've got nothing to do with what's going on in Gaza, but they're getting their tax money taken away, because it gets managed by the Israeli Authority and redistributed back over there. If that's not an occupation, I don't know what is.
It's interesting, the power of promotion and the power of propaganda of these countries. You mentioned that Russia was being hauled into the International Criminal Court for shutting off the water. But if you look at the Minsk II agreement by detail, and this was a negotiated agreement that was signed from the president of the Ukraine, Vladimir Putin, the German chancellor, and I believe it was at the time Hollande was in power in France. In that agreement, it specifically said, Ukraine, turn back on the water in the people in the Donbass. Give them back their pensions, which you have cut off. Open back up the borders. Turn on the electricity. These were actual things that were pointed out in the Minsk agreement in writing, signed and declared by other nations. And it blows my mind that, propaganda is very powerful. And it's not just, it's a word that is thrown out to people like us. Well, they'll say, hey, guys, you're in China, you're propagandists and stuff. The biggest propaganda in the world is the American media machine. Do not underestimate them. coming up in this election that is coming up in November, we are going to see some pretty remarkable promotion. And the power of the media is, whether we like to accept it or not, it is absolutely powerful. They will just bang away. I'll give you an example. You're going to hear this word many times: convicted felon, convicted felon, convicted felon.
Yeah.
They're going to be opening with that line after line after line. And if you don't think that the American media can wear down people, they have the ability to wear down where they've convinced their nations to support $500 billion in a war they shouldn't be with.
Yeah,
and that's very.
I think the key you're talking about the demographics of TikTok having much younger users also.
Right.
When they're faced with these images, they haven't had the same lifelong indoctrination that has set people up to be able to look at these images and say, well, you know, Israel's got to do what they got to do.
Yeah.
You know, if you're under a certain age and you haven't been subjected to as much propaganda as the older generation, you're going to say, no, how can you possibly excuse this at all?
Yeah.
How can, you know, it's yeah.
Well, it's a tough one too, because, you know, I grew up when with the Afghanistan war. So at that time, right, there's no social media. There's no TikTok, there's no Instagram, there's no Twitter, nothing's in real time. The only insight that you have into that Afghanistan war is when you turn on ABC News or CBS News, you know, at 7 o'clock in the evening time. So, you know, there's 100% control from the government and from the media centers. They will let the public know. Now you have independent journalists. Now you have this guy that gets 18 million followers in the span of 3 months. And why does he get 18 million? Because it's like, this guy's saying, here's what's happening on the ground in Palestine. Like, and I'm going to show you everything.
Yeah.
Every single thing. Graphic, you know, terrible, good, bad, and everything else. And, you know, and so it's a very real thing. And again, that's, you know, I think if we had the Instagram and TikToks available back in 2000s when we were, you know, doing all of these terrible actions and killing millions of Muslims in the Middle East during that war, you know, American sentiment would have been much different. But again, it's the propaganda machine, right? I mean, if you ever watched this movie called Vice with Christian Bale, where he plays Dick Cheney, and, you know, they go throughout that whole scene on how can we lie to the American public? And they did a whole you know, survey, and they did a whole survey based with Americans, and they went through and they looked, well, nobody trusts George Bush, you know, Dick Cheney, no one trusts you either, but Colin Powell, the American people believe you. If we can get you to stand on that trial, they're going to believe you. They're going to believe this lie of weapons of mass destruction. And in the movie, you know, it's like, well, I don't know how comfortable I feel about doing this. And Dick Cheney kind of comes over to George Bush, is like, are you the man? Are you the president here? Are you going to tell this man who's boss? Get him to do this. I mean, it's a very big scene, and you know, and it's a, you know, obviously based on a true story. And then you see Colin Powell on his deathbed saying, you know, that was the single worst thing I've done. You know, regret that every day of my life.
Bullshit, he regrets it.
You know, I mean,
bullshit.
Well, I mean, that's what he said on his deathbed. But you know, there's, I mean, did you guys see the story this week with China? The fact that the Pentagon had launched this huge did you see this disinformation campaign for China's vaccines throughout the Philippines and Philippines and the Middle East? So they had said they put out this propaganda in the Middle East that the vaccine was made with pork. All right, so then now all the Muslims are fearing that. And of course, you know, because the Philippines are getting close to China, it's like, well, we need to have, the United States needs to have our strategic interest in the South China Sea. So let's go ahead and sow some discord between, you know, the Philippines and China. We're going to, and so this whole big, huge story from Reuters that just published that the Pentagon had launched this massive propaganda effort, and there was even quotes in there that were just so over the top, like, our goal really wasn't, you know, to get the correct information out. It was really just to drag China's name through the mud. Like, wow, what a quote, you know, what a quote, you know. And so this is what we're seeing, is that I'm living in America. I'm the only one that's living in the United States currently right now. And I just tell you, on the ground there, I honestly cannot tell you a single person that I know that if you say, do you trust the government? Do you trust our politicians? Do you trust the media? I should probably make a video of that, just walking down the streets of America, just say, like, let's ask Americans if they trust their government, and just get the reactions. That would make a great YouTube video. Because I don't know a single person. I don't know a single person that has any trust in the government and just doesn't think the entire thing is corrupt, has no faith in the politicians, and is at a point where a lot of Americans are just like, you know what, I'm going to try to pay it as little tax as possible, and then just, I don't want to hear about this. And you know what? Yeah, this election, it's awful, because it's a choice between bad, and it's the same damn thing every 4 years. Bad and bad. worse and worse. And, I mean, it's always funny because we criticize China for being a one-party state. Well, America is just one more. We just have one more.
It's a one-party state with two brand names.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's not too much.
What's amazing, though, is that a lot of these people who you'll talk to and who you'll ask, do you trust mainstream media? Do you trust your government? You'll get a no. But then if you ask them, do you trust what they tell you about China? Yeah. They still do.
Yeah.
There's this disconnect.
I've actually used that line, though. And I've had some people like kind of get the light bulb comes on like, no, I don't trust my government. No, I don't trust them. Do you trust them about China? Well, if you don't trust them about covering domestic politics in America, how could they possibly know about China? Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
I think this will be, what's happening in, obviously people are realizing the narrative about Russia is quite a bit more complex than their media and government would like them to believe. And obviously they can see the disconnect between what the correct moral stance is on what's happening in Israel and Palestine versus what their media and their government is trying to convince them to think and feel. So I think this will also be a big shift in where maybe they think a little bit more about the narratives that they put out related to any foreign country. Oh, maybe that's wishful thinking, but that would be a logical thing that happens when they see that, it's not only domestically we don't trust them. We don't trust them about what they say overseas either.
Right.
We're bouncing over to you, Patrick. You got something to say?
Yeah, and the people did trust the government when they said we were going into Iraq for the weapons of mass destruction. Not only the people, but the military too. I was in the U.S. military from 2001 till 2006, and in 2003, when we I was on an aircraft carrier headed to the Persian Gulf. They were telling us, what they were telling everybody, all these weapons of mass destruction were waiting for us, and that was our job to get rid of them. In fact, we went out to sea for what was supposed to be a two-week sea trials, and then Donald Rumsfeld signed the order, and we went to the Gulf, and we were told we might be gassed and all this. They literally made us take anthrax vaccines that's had in many adverse after effects, smallpox vaccines, all this on the way to war. We knew we were going there for war. And of course, as everyone knows, we didn't find the weapons of mass destruction. It was, everybody was lied to from the top to the bottom. Yeah. The horrible situation. Now it's just being perpetuated.
Right.
Yeah, I'm still trying to, trying to accept which war did America get into that was justifiable in my lifetime. Because as I go back in history...
Well, I'm hoping you're very old and that you were born before World War II.
No, let me clarify this. If you go back and you look at, Yugoslavia and the breakup of Yugoslavia, and you research it and you go to these countries, I went to every one of them after it was broken up into pieces. And they all blamed the West for this. And they said, listen, we've had skirmishes for many years. We dealt with them internally. And then Bill Clinton comes into the White House. The drums start beating quickly. We're talking quickly. Monica Lewinsky trial, the dress, the DNA sample, and then full-on bombardment of 78 days of absolutely just trashing a country to never be rebounded. And that's why a lot of our viewers have to understand why Serbia has such a good relationship with China and Russia.
Yeah, big time.
And history, teaches us before I was having an internet moment where I was talking to my wife and I said, prior to 1996, you got your information from the television or the Britannica encyclopedias.
Right.
Before that, you had to believe what was in those notebooks. You had to believe in what's on that television. But as we go back now in history, how far can we go back to say, wait a moment, this isn't what it says or what we were taught it was going to be. And moving forward, now at least we have some mechanisms, some individuals like Patrick Lancaster and Daniel that does incredible work, and same with you, Cyrus, that push back on this narrative. So what's in store for us in the future here? I mean, they've failed in Russia. They're failing, I think, at least the Israelis are failing from a PR standpoint. I mean, what's next? Who's next?
Well, that's in the title of the video, isn't it?
Yeah, who's next?
China.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, Patrick, you had a question, and I think it's a good time to bring it up because Patrick and I have had discussions about Hong Kong. We've had discussions about Taiwan. The drums are beating. We saw at the intro of this. How can we down China? Are we going to see some issues here?
I mean, it's certainly heating up. It has been confirmed that there are U.S. military personnel on Taiwanese islands, which are just, a few miles off the border of mainland China. They were trying really hard to get people riled up about China with the Muslims in Xinjiang issue. You haven't seen as much of that recently, I think, because of how awkward it is to still be talking about Muslims in China who need their help while they're supplying the weapons to kill Muslims in the Middle East. So what you've seen them do now over the last few days is they've pivoted back to Tibet. And I've said it online before, too, that it was bound to happen. It was going to happen again. So the American government is now questioning the legitimacy of China's control over Tibet. So you've got this, and they said in the article, it was really weird. They said in the article that they wanted to do this so that they would push China to have talks with the Dalai Lama. Now this is bizarre because, well, first of all, from the whole premise of a country that is, was formed 500 years after Tibet became a part of China during the Yuan dynasty. And they want to push dialogue with a person who says that Tibet is a part of China and should remain a part of China. Right. The Dalai Lama has said it many times over and over and over again. Right. And I put a compilation of that video on Twitter. But you can see that they're just looking for any angle. They're looking for anything to antagonize China with. Like, why now? Why do you got to do this now? And I mean, even from the point of view of putting military personnel in Taiwan, when your own policy recognizes the one China policy, that Taiwan is a part of China. I mean, that's a pretty big violation, even according to your own standards and your own rules. Yeah.
Well, I think you're spot on because, going back to the Israel-Palestine real quick, is what you're seeing is you're seeing the United States and Israel are being isolated on the world stage like never before. And because the United States is consistently just, they're going to back Israel no matter what. These two, their reputation certainly is going downhill, and nowhere faster than Israel. I mean, their PR is at an absolute low point right now, and especially with the latest raid where they had dramatically rescued these 4 hostages. But by the way, we slaughtered 450 people and doing that, but most of them were in a safe zone area to begin with. And then I don't know if you saw that as well. Then they had to criticize China as well because one of the 4 Israeli hostages, she's mixed race, so her mother is from China. Okay, but this Israeli girl, this hostage, so she has some Chinese heritage, but she's never been to China. She doesn't have a Chinese passport. She has no connection to China. But basically Israel came out and the U.S. said, well, look at China. You guys didn't even help this person out. And it's like, oh, sorry, was this our citizen? This person never even set foot in China in her life, but yet we're getting criticized for not helping her. Last time I checked, you need to be a national of the country.
This makes sense from a Zionist perspective, because from a Zionist perspective, your ethnicity grants you certain rights and privileges and perks.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the whole idea about that Jewish people belong in this land, so they need to kick Palestinians out to reclaim it. So I think they're just continuing the same logic. She has Chinese blood. She should be getting these benefits from the. Totally. It's like not everybody thinks as insane as you, as insanely as you.
And it's ridiculous when you hear some of the spokesmen for the Israeli army when they get on the television and they're talking about, well, we went into Gaza and yes, of course, we ended up killing 50 civilians, but we got 2 members of Hamas. And it was interesting. A journalist asked them while he was speaking, they said, well, do you use those same techniques if that happened in Israel? If there was someone from Hamas, let's say, in a location in Israel, would you kill 50 of your civilians to kill the one guy? Yeah. And he stumbled there and he just kind of like paused and you're like, yeah, okay. Thanks for your quote, buddy. Yeah, but I appreciate it.
I want to pick up on one thing that somebody's saying in the comments here. there's somebody who says the Dalai Lama is the Dalai Lama because of central government accreditation. I want to pick up on that because a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people believe that in the period of a few decades before the 60s, that Tibet was independent, even though no nation recognized it as independent. But even during that time, when the Dalai Lama was born, and the authorities and the religious authorities wanted to turn him into the Dalai Lama, they were supposed to use a process called the Golden Urn process. But they applied for approval from the Qing dynasty central government to go, and there's all the records, the documents and everything are still out there. They applied for approval from the central government, and the central government also provided the funds for his inauguration party. So, I mean, this happened during the time that people are like, no, during this period of time, it actually wasn't. No, it has been for 500 years before America even became a country. Yeah. So I just wanted to finish on that note too.
Well, what's interesting as well is, we've got 2 Canadians here, and I don't know if you guys have heard the news as well. Canada being the good lapdog of the U.S. That's what the members of Parliament we also support America's decision. We also questioning if Tibet is part of China, and we don't agree with this now. So it's the same thing where it's amazing how the U.S. has to pivot. You can kind of see them just scratching their heads in the back, just like, okay, the Xinjiang narrative's not working right now. We're kind of killing a bunch of all this US, all of these bombs are slaughtering these Muslims in the Middle East. Can't really hide it. It's the damn thing's all over TikTok. I can't get rid of these guys that are sharing these. But let's go ahead and pivot back to there. Let's try to hammer the Xinjiang one. All right, that's not working either. Let's go ahead and pivot back over to Tibet.
It'll be back.
And then now we're going to go to the next one, which is probably going to be Taiwan next. So let's go ahead and so it's just like
they tried Inner Mongolia for a little while there though, but that kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, I remember this.
There was a very short period, and they're like, now there's not enough to go on here. I mean, they're talking about the culture of Inner Mongolia, the Mongolian culture being erased, when it's the Mongolians in Inner Mongolia still using the original Mongolian script. Even in Mongolia proper, they don't use the original Mongolian script. And you see that across the board. Yeah. You see Kazakhs in China who have actually preserved their culture even better than the Kazakhs in Kazakhstan, who many of them only speak Russian. But in China, they're still speaking Kazakh. Same with the Kyrgyz people and all of this. And when you go around these little communities where they have, and they're from an ethnic group that belong to another country as well, the culture has been preserved in China more than in their original home countries.
Okay, I just want to say to everybody that's watching the program right now, we do have a pretty cool panel, I must admit. If you have questions for Patrick Lancaster, myself, Daniel Dumbrill, or Cyrus JANSSEN, put them in the chat now. I will try to keep an eye on them over the next 15 minutes, and we'll pull some of them up and we'll try to answer them as many as possible. I want to pivot just to Southeast Asia here for a moment, gentlemen. I know we don't really cover this target country too much, but Myanmar, since I moved to Asia, Myanmar has been, going through quite destabilization here. The American government has been involved. We do see a pro-American where they will get a lot of the NGO organizations into this part. They will use this tactics. I think, Daniel, this might be where you can help us out. And I'm just going to go a little bit more in depth here. A lot of these countries in Southeast Asia are part of the International Land Sea Trade Corridor, which is part of the One Belt, One Road. And China is making a huge amount of investments in these countries. I've seen the investments in Thailand. I've seen them in, Myanmar as well, with, not just going there building logistical lines, but also improving people's lives. And this is a threat to the American economy as China can put its geopolitical issues aside and say, wait a minute, whatever, issues we had in history, let's move forward. Let's get you an airport. I recently interviewed the ambassador in China here for Nicaragua. He said in the last 5 years, his country is booming. China's down there helping them with ports, building airports, new energy vehicles are coming on board. So we see the same here in Southeast Asia. but we're now starting to see heavy influence here from NGO organizations that are infiltrating into these countries to destabilize it. Brian Berletic has really covered this region before in Myanmar, showing that, whoever America wants into that government, they will get them into that government using the techniques. Maybe you can explain what happened in Hong Kong with outside influence, what that does to, potentially a region or regions around the world, the power of the American NGOs, the playbook. Maybe you can help us out a little bit with that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a long time in the making, Hong Kong. They set the foundation from quite a long time ago. Hong Kong, before they introduced the national security law, I mean, they were ranked the third freest place on earth. They had very little controls, which had obviously advantages and disadvantages. And the disadvantages that something like that could be taken advantage of. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, it was funny during that time that, ranked the third freest place on earth was by the Cato Institute from the US, which is not a pro-China report. They tried to add all of these qualifications and descriptions that said, well, we still have some issues with them. But when they actually used their mathematical formula in terms of women's right, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, freedom of press, all this kind of stuff, they were number 3 on the list. And the US, who was coming to free Hong Kong, was number 17 on that same list. But what they would do is they would fund, so through not only the NED, there's another one, the NDI, and a few other ones. They would fund these activists. Benny's High, he was funded through the Center for Cooperative Law or something like that. In one of these universities, he was funded directly by this NDI organization, and he was one of the guys who started the original Umbrella Revolution. You also had material making its way into public schools as well. I had a friend send me their child's homework where it's had these questions that you had to fill in. And basically one of them was the full filled in version was, I am a river in America. I am free and beautiful and clean. I am a river in China. I am dirty and sad. Like this was in a primary school kids' homework. Like they wanted to brainwash these kids from young to grow up and basically riot against China. So when you don't
which is actually what we're seeing in Taiwan as well. The changing of curriculum and history and
I mean, it's a really important part. And they allow it. I mean, a lot of people in Taiwan probably think that America are their friends. And that's not the case. I mean, even in the, taking it back very temporarily to Tibet, even the Dalai Lama's own brother in his book, The Noodle Maker of Camping, I can't remember exactly what the title is. He said that one of his biggest regrets in life was working with the CIA. He said that he knew if the CIA was successful in Tibet, it would have turned into another Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever it was. That was, directly from him. So even he recognized that. I think a lot of people in Taiwan don't realize the danger with making friends like these. And it's odd because obviously some of them think they need it for protection, but it's kind of a circular situation. The reason that these tensions are rising is because of America's involvement there. Before America really got their hands into this and started pushing this narrative again, relations between Taiwan and mainland China were improving all the time. You had the first direct flights that opened up, and it was just getting better and better and better. And now when you have these outside hands in there, it's just kind of going downhill. But any society, when they allow these kinds of NGOs in, those are the kinds of things they're going to do. They're going to brainwash their students. They're going to fund people who are going to create revolutions like the Umbrella Revolution or whatever it is. And so, I mean, inevitably, if America wants to kind of break up some of those relationships in Southeast Asia, you're probably going to have things like that going on, along with the negative media as well. When China started making a lot of headway into Africa, the U.S. brought out a plan. I can't remember how much it was, $3 billion over 7 years, or $500 million a year, specifically to fund negative coverage about China overseas.
It was that much, yeah.
It was.
Right, yeah. And a lot of it was going to Africa, and there was some journalists from I can't remember if it was Zimbabwe or where it was, but they revealed that they were given offers to write content negative about China. So these are all the different components that are going to happen in these countries that China has improving relations with.
I mean, thank you for answering that. I think that gives us a very clear indication on, what Southeast Asian countries could potentially be at risk here, unless they have a very strong support from their people with their governments. Very easy, the same playbook could destabilize these regions. And we are seeing that currently right now in Myanmar. We're seeing that a lot of these rebels, independent rebels that are backing, instability in the country, are getting support by a lot of these NGO organizations, and as well as a lot of government-funded think tanks and so on. It's the same playbook over and over and over again. And this does have repercussions for the people that live in these countries when there's mega projects that are being built to try to better people's lives, to build infrastructure. America looks at that as a threat. They will use the playbook, as you said. I think it was about $500 million was passed in Congress per year for negative articles. They are out there. Watch for them. We identify them. We know on this panel who's writing some stuff, making some videos that actually don't make any sense. I think there was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Do you guys remember all those videos that came out about China? China's economy is over by very, very, very big influential YouTubers that were on here.
Yeah,
very interesting.
Yeah, actually, it was interesting because I had heard of this agency that actually works with influencers on campaigns, and so this agency actually got busted because they were pumping this huge crypto thing that went bankrupt. But basically, when they went, so the agency got in trouble because they had basically hired about 15 YouTube influencers to make videos, and it was all the same script. It was the same thing about China, and so it was almost, if you watch those intros, it's the same headline that, in 28 days, China's economy is going to collapse. 30 days, it happens.
It was almost the same script.
It was the same script. I mean, it was the same.
It's crazy.
And so again, you look for those patterns. It's kind of like the college teacher, when they're grading the papers and they're looking for patterns. It's like, hey, everybody answered the first 10 questions the same way. Probably an indication there's some cheating going on. So similar thing is, I mean, and I think that's what. The good thing about this, and the good thing while we're here on YouTube and we're having shows like this is, we want to thank everybody that's tuning in here, because you're watching all 4 of our channels. I mean, Patrick, you're literally putting your life on the risk every day when you go to work. Literally. I mean, you are, doing, reporting the stuff that media doesn't want to hear. Right? I mean, what's really interesting for me, Patrick, is I did not know really anything about Ukraine and Russia, prior to 2022. So, and I think that's the vast majority of most Americans, so it's very easy for the U.S. government to just be like, wow, look at this thing that just happened in 2022. And, and it's like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. Poor Ukraine, and it's just, and so, then you start doing some research and you're like, wow, it has nothing to do with 2022. It's everything that started in 2014. This has been going on for a lot longer than that. Right. But I'll admit, and Alex helped me get there, by, just saying, hey, buddy, you need to do a little bit more research on this, and really looking at, it's not just what's happened in the last 2 years, it's what's happened in the last 12 years,
and I think that shows us, and I'm going to let you answer this in a second here, but I want to say that was a defining moment in where Cyrus and I, we discussed it, we talked about it, and I said, hold on a minute. I'm careful, because we, at some points, we also are a victim of the powerful media.
Right.
We're told a narrative and we follow it. Sometimes we make mistakes, and it's by having these types of relationships with guys like this on the panel. Don't think that there's a day that goes by where all 4 of us are sitting in the room and agreeing on everything. There comes a time where I think we had an evening with Patrick one night where we had a discussion, a couple of things about China. And I said, best thing to do, get on an airplane, get over here. And he did that. And it's really opening your eyes here. And I think that is very helpful for people out there. When you're going out for dinner and you're at that dinner table, hey, stand up what you believe in, challenge that person that's beside you in a positive way, of course, and talk about it. Because if we don't, and we let this media overtake us, all of us, I've made a huge amount of mistakes on missed calls. I thought this thing in Ukraine was over a long time ago. I was saying, no, they'll never. No, he won't go. He won't go. He did go. So anyway, Patrick, we're going to pass the mic over to you for a minute. Then we'll just do a round table and we'll wrap her up in about 10 minutes. You guys cool with that?
Yeah.
All right. Fire away, sir.
I mean, it's like that. Sharing information, seeing as much information as possible. Like my grandpa always used to say, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And it's great that we're able to share information between ourselves and with our prospective viewers. And like I say in all of my reports, don't just watch my reports. Watch reports from the other side. Educate yourself. Do as much research as possible so you have somewhat of a real idea of what may be going on, and you can decide for yourself, not just be led and spoon-fed information that just benefits some narrative. Actually make your own narrative, make your own thoughts on what the real situation is. And I'm glad we can all do that together and help these people understand with us and learn with us as we learn.
There is a link in the description below for Patrick Lancaster. I have to tell you, the audience, that the term demonetization, I learned that from Patrick. He was one of the first YouTubers ever demonetized on the platform. He's a crowdfunded freelance journalist. His link is in my description. Please go over and subscribe to his channel, as well as donate to this guy that puts his life on the line every single day to try to give all of us a different perspective on what is going on in this world. Thank you for us having your voice, because if we didn't, things would probably look quite different in the world. I'm going to pass it on to Daniel, who's been such a kind person to allow us to sit in this wonderful studio today.
No, absolutely. It's my pleasure. I agree with what you said there about Patrick as well. I mean, putting your life on the line to tell these stories, and it's actually possible these days, but everybody just needs to kind of stay alert to what's out there. Everybody's eyes have been opened up enough to realize that the mainstream narratives that they're trying to feed you and what your governments are telling you is really not aligned with reality. And you might not necessarily recognize that first on something like Russia or with China, but you can see it happening in front of your eyes with something like Israel. And it's a pattern. It goes across the board. This is what they do with all of their narratives. It's not about truth seeking for them. It's about upholding whatever narratives are good for their empire or businesses or whatever it is that they're out for in that particular moment. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to add other than that. And I guess maybe we could wrap up also with. I had a curiosity question that I didn't get to also, which was, and I don't know if you don't want to answer, it's fine, but. You said, you're in a situation in America now where you have a choice between bad and bad. But if you had to, gun to the head, you had to choose one.
This is interesting.
This is a good question. I mean, it's so tough because, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump in the way that I was a fan of Donald Trump in 2016, and in the sense that I'm like, you know what, let's get somebody in there to shake things up. Let's just kind of get in there. And I think there was a lot of policies that I think that he did good. And I think he really lost the 2020 election by himself. I think Donald Trump lost 2020 as opposed to Biden winning it, in the sense that if he could have just kept his mouth shut, been a little bit less active on Twitter, I think he could have probably, won that one. I'm to the point now where I will probably not vote, to be honest. In the sense that I'm so appalled by what the Biden administration has been doing, just with this war in Gaza, the fact that we cannot, I just feel that Netanyahu has like his foot on his throat, and he's just, putting some pressure on him and basically just calling the shots. I don't feel very confident with the Trump. I mean, RFK's come out basically saying, he's come out with some very, very pro-Israel, just kind of like, essentially, if we got to annihilate the Palestinians, then so be it. Let's just get on with it and make sure that Israel's fine. So, that was trending on Twitter today. So I'm just kind of like, man, like, I don't even know if I want to vote, to be honest. That's kind of where I'm at this point. I really can't, because it's almost like, you put your name, if you're going to vote, I'll say for 2020, I didn't vote. For 2020, I didn't vote. And I think that's where a lot of my frustrations are in this, is that I just don't, we kind of in America, it's just like it's always this thing of, well, in China you don't get a vote for your president, but in America you do, and that's why we're better. And it's like, well, I have two awful choices, and you know what? I really don't care, so I'm not even going to vote. Right. So that way you can't use that against me. And and it's kind of like, you know what I'd rather have? I'd rather just have a competent leader as opposed to the power to vote. It's not. There's a lot more to democracy than just being able to choose your leader. And I think that there's just a lot of frustration, that I feel in that. I feel to the point where right now I have no faith in the system. I just, we know that, it's going to be Biden or Trump leading again, after this election, or maybe they're going to switch out Biden. Right? I mean, I don't think there's no way he can go for another 4 years. But, I guess my only hope is that in 2026, we're going to get, two fresh new candidates that are hopefully younger. But again, it's this whole system that's corrupt. Right. You've got corruption from A to Z. So I don't feel optimistic. I feel like I'm becoming a lot of the Americans that I'm seeing, where it's just like, again, let me pay as little tax as I can, leave me alone. And I mean, and the other thing you can't comprehend as well is when you're living in America is the absolute bombardment of advertising and political things. Like, I'm not kidding you. Every day when you open your mailbox, you're getting between 10 to 12 paper adverts of politicians. It's not just the president, right? It's the senator, it's the congressman, it's this. So every day you're just flooded with papers into your mailbox, and it's like the phone calls. You get phone call advertisements, you'll get TV commercials. Like, you are just pumped full of that from like now until November. Like, it's just, you are just completely suppressed with all of this information. It's just like, I don't care, just let me get on with my life. Right. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
It's interesting. I mean, you talked about how a lot of these people say that, we can vote for our president, and that's what makes us better. The other thing that they say is, we can, we can protest. They think protests don't happen in China. That's a longer topic, but they think that because they can protest and they can swear at their president and they can say whatever they want. That's great, but what do you actually accomplish? Exactly. You can scream into the wind all day long and nothing changes. Yes. And if you scream long enough with enough people, they'll bring in the National Guard after a certain period of time and drag you off the campuses. Yes, exactly. And so for me, like looking as an outsider, looking at America, I'm kind of the opposite of you. I didn't like Trump in 2016. Yeah. And he's kind of, I wouldn't say I like him now, but he's grown on me. And I'll explain that a little bit more after I ask my next question, which is not who would you prefer, because obviously you're just going to not vote, but who do you think is going to win?
And I think it's going to be Trump. Yeah. I think what's happening right now is I think Biden administration is really going down a very wrong path with the war in Gaza. I think he's completely alienated himself with the younger voters. I think as well as that with this continued funding in Ukraine, this is going to be a big deal because again, we're seeing massive inflation. It's not like the United States economy is strong. Again, we're here in China where everyone's like, China is going to collapse. The economy is terrible. Well, you know what? Guess what? There's a lot of Americans that are struggling and are saying the same thing. So I think that I definitely think that this conviction is going to be fuel to the fire for Donald Trump. I really do. And I think that if I had to bet money on it, I would put my money on Trump.
I would too. And the reason I would say that it's hard to say that I would prefer him. But I think the reason that I look at him as having an advantage in terms of me wanting to see him run the country rather than Biden is for a few different reasons. One is I think he is the guy who has the potential to mess up the system the most. He was against NATO. Yeah. He didn't take us into any new conflicts. He obviously got really close when he assassinated Soleimani. Right. But more important, he says exactly what he means when it comes to foreign policy. Like when he was leaving troops in Syria, he said it over and over and over again. We're leaving troops there for the oil. Right. We're taking the oil. Right. And even Assad himself said Trump is the best president we could wish for, because he's not talking about he's here for human rights or anything like that. He just says directly, he's here to take our oil. And he's he's very transparent about it. Yeah. With the Israel situation, I think that the worst case scenario is it's no different than Biden. I think the Palestinians will still continue to suffer.
Oh yeah.
But and maybe this is just wishful thinking on my part, because I seem to remember there was some sort of an Israel lobby thing that he was at way back in 2016, somewhere around then, when he just said directly to the audience, where he says, there's a lot of people here that I don't like, and you don't like me, but I need you. Yeah. And so I don't know if he's planning on doing, one term, and he knows that he needs the Israel lobby on his side.
Yeah.
If he just plays the game until he gets in, and then he says, okay, no, I'm not actually going to support you guys in that. I think it's probably a little bit of wishful thinking. I mean, at the end of the day, he was the one who moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And
the reality is that this is the kind of the oxymoron and the catch-22 is that Biden's going to lose a lot of the younger vote because of his stance on this war again in Gaza. But the reality is that Trump is probably even more pro-Israel than Biden.
Yeah,
and so I think that's it's kind of like, I don't want to vote for Biden over this, but if you're voting for Trump, he's actually going to be even more, pro-Israel.
I think obviously there's a lot of wishful thinking that goes into that, but it's hard to, and knock on wood, it's hard to imagine that it would just be any worse than it is now, anyways. Right. Like it would just be kind of be the status quo, because no matter what, both parties are supporting Israel on this. But I mean, there's all these other candidates who are coming out. Like every time I say on my streams or on my videos that there's no other real choice, you've got a Zionist and a Zionist. Right. They say, well, we've got like, what's her name, Jill Stein or whatever.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Jill Stein. Yeah. But it's like, I don't know what's going on. Like you would think that that if people really wanted to vote against Biden because of what he's doing, and they see that Trump is probably going to do the same thing, why doesn't she get a huge number of votes coming in? Is it just because she's not getting airtime?
Oh, yeah. She's not. Well, let's look at this. Is RFK Jr. is the highest third party candidate in the polls since Ross Perot, which was about 30 years ago. So and in actually some states, I believe, for example, Utah, Donald Trump is winning with 46%. Biden and RFK are both at 20%. So he's, neck and neck with Biden for the number 2 spot. So there's actually a lot of requirements, for example, to get on the stage. So I think within 1 week, you're going to have the presidential debate, Biden versus Trump. That's going to be a great thing to watch, because at this point with U.S. politics, we just go for entertainment. That will be entertaining to watch. But in order to get on the actual stadium, or the podium, in order to attend that, there has to be a lot of requirements that you have to do. For example, I think you need to be in at least 26. You have to be on the ballot in at least 26 states, and you have to have a pathway to at least the 320 electoral votes that you need to become president. So RFK has not been invited on that because both the Republican and Democrats are blocking him because they don't want him there. But he's like, hey, all of these requirements, including the electoral college votes, I've met as well. So actually that's why this Jill Stern, I've never even heard of her until you just said her name. So that's 100% why, because she has no airtime. But that's the interesting thing is even RFK, who has qualified and should be on the stage, right, he has earned his spot. Whether you like him or not, we're just talking about what's the requirements. He's met them. Simple and square. He won't be there because the Republicans and Democrats, they don't want him there because obviously it's taking votes away.
We got one more American on the panel here. Thoughts on what these characters are saying?
Well, it's. I don't think any American really wants Biden to win down, truthfully, and I don't think many believe it's going to happen. How the world will react, or the population of the United States will react to the election, we'll have to see. But it's either way, there's going to be some amount of conflict and unrest, I believe.
I'm going to give my 2 cents now.
All right.
I will not forget what happened in a courtroom a couple of weeks ago. When you can convince a district attorney to bring 34 misdemeanor charges to felonies, when you can silence the sitting president of the United States on social media, yeah, there's Trump, and then there's the Republican Party, and that party is divided itself.
Big time.
So if it's not Trump, if it's not Biden, I have a feeling that Americans are suffering, and they're suffering from these massive high interest rates, this massive inflation. Their backs are against the wall, and they might just say, we've had enough. And we're in what now? We're mid-June. I have heard stories from even their viewers and people that comment on our videos that says, Alex, life is, you haven't been in Canada in a while. You haven't been in the United States in a while. Things are very, very difficult. We actually don't believe in any president's going to get us out of the hole we're in right now, where you can maybe afford a loaf of bread, some cheese, keep the lights on part of the week, and really seeing a lot of people getting sunk under in major mortgages. I had a friend of mine tell me that his daughter's mortgage, when she went to refinance it, was just mind-blowing. And the only alternative, the branch managers at the bank, was throw another decade on your mortgage. And she said, but then I'll be 75 years old when the mortgage is done, and I will maybe start collecting pension at 65. I can't work till I'm 74. So I think if you push society to the brink, I don't think anybody's caring about November. I think everybody's caring about next week, the week after that, living paycheck to paycheck. And the last time we saw this, it ended up on the streets. And let's remind ourselves that Americans, in their Constitution, and you know the Constitution very clearly, that these people can take matters into their own hands. And I'm not saying that terrible things can happen, but if we look back in history, where economies, it won't take much for that economy to, right now we're seeing strange things happen. The financial markets are at all-time high, but the average person's not benefiting from that.
No.
They're moving into houses that are beyond their means. They can't afford it. Now, will this snowball before November, or will this outcome of the election not be accepted by a lot of people anymore?
It's definitely a very real possibility. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of frustration with either candidate winning, right? I don't think people, I agree with what Patrick said in the sense of, I don't think that, let's go back to 2020. Anybody that voted for Biden, I don't think it was a vote for Biden. It was more a vote against Trump. If you didn't like Trump, you're going to vote for Biden. No, I mean, with his age and no one was excited to have Joe Biden as their president. It was just simply, I don't want to vote for Trump, so I'm going to vote for the other guy. So I think with again, I believe that Trump has very much captivated a lot of people. I think he's growing his base, and just look at the handle that he has on that Republican Party. That there was nobody that could even challenge him. I mean, in that primary, he destroyed everybody. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was never even close. So it's going to be interesting because, yeah, I mean, we're going to see what's going to happen in November. But Alex, you brought up a good point. I mean, I think it is but people are very frustrated. Is the cost of living, and it kind of goes back to these other things as well. When we say, look, we're going to send another $61 billion to Ukraine. We're going to sign a new 10-year pact with them, which, by the way, that immediately when they said that, that it does actually give an option for future presidents to immediately get out of that, which a lot of people are saying. I had interviewed a former U.S. Army Colonel, Daniel Davis, who said, and I asked him point blank, what's going to happen if Trump wins? How do you think he'll handle Ukraine? He says, I think he'll go right for the negotiated settlement immediately. Just get out, just finish that war and get out of there. And so again, it's very hard, I think, for Americans at this point to say we need to fight Russia for the next 10 years when they're looking at I'm trying to pay my mortgage, and I honestly don't give a crap about that. Like you said, 88% of Americans are wanting NATO member states to push Ukraine to negotiate a settlement. And at the end of the day, like Patrick has laid out so clearly, you're fighting over these 4 territories that under Russian law are part of Russia. But most importantly, right, people don't want to be there. They don't want to be part of Ukraine, right? This is just as simple as that. And it's like, and it's the same thing where we say, the U.S. will say, hey, we need to the Taiwanese people should have the right to self-determination. We love that word self-determination, so we'll apply it to certain things. These people should have it, but some people shouldn't.
Well, big respect to everybody on the panel tonight. Patrick, you have a last word that you'd like to tell our audience?
I want to give a little. Some bad news came a few hours ago today in the Donetsk region. There was a colleague and journalist killed by Ukrainian drone attack today. And day before yesterday, there was another video journalist killed and his partner disfigured. And this is on top of the dozens of journalists that have been killed in Ukrainian attacks on that side of the front line. So prayers and thoughts go out to them and their family.
Well, Patrick, from all of us, please be safe. Please enjoy your journey here in China. We hope that you get the answers that you came here for. What a pleasure it was to see Cyrus JANSSEN again. And of course, my good friend, Daniel Dumbrill, who I just live up the road from. It's great, everyone. And thanks again. We'll put a little bit of cool music on here, and we will see you guys in the comment sections. Once again, everybody's links are in my description. Cyrus JANSSEN, Daniel Dumbrill, Patrick LANCATSER. Do not forget to subscribe to those channels, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. We'll see you in the comment section. Bye-bye.